Good afternoon, everyone, and on our live stream and to those in chambers as well. Welcome to the meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority for the 28th of January 2005. I'd like to start first by acknowledging the Muwina people as the traditional owners of the land. We recognise all Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the original owners and the continuing custodians of the land and waters of this island in Truida. We pay our respects to Aboriginal elders past and present, and we commit to working for a city that welcomes and respects all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. My name is Russell Yaxley. I'm the Deputy Mayor and Acting Mayor of the Glenorchy City Council and Chair of this afternoon's Planning Authority meeting. Joining me this afternoon, my fellow authority members, Alderman King, Alderman Josh Cockshut, Alderman Tim Marks, and Alderman Justin Stringer. And we've got a number of staff, planning staff here with us this afternoon as well, so welcome to you and to those in chambers of members of the public. So number one item today on the agenda is the Planning Authority Declaration, which I will go through. So the Glenorchy Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act in 1993. The Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of Council. The meeting procedures are as follows. The Planning Officer will present an assessment and recommendation and then answer any questions of the elected members. I will invite the applicant and any other interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting, and speakers will be limited to 5 minutes. Please note a decision has not been made on any application. And there's something I want to make a point of now is that there was an article appeared in the media last week which had a headline that an item on tonight's agenda had been approved, and further comment that it had a green light. And I want to assure our community that this is not the case. I, as well as other members of the Planning Authority, have made no decision whatsoever at this point. It's disappointing that this has happened because it can cause confusion in our community and it doesn't help for good governance. So I want to make it really clear that there is no decision that has been made at this point. As chairperson, I may ask the Planning Authority to comment on any matters raised by applicants or interested parties. The Planning Authority will then discuss the application. For statutory planning applications, the Planning Authority decides the application and the senior statutory planner explains the appeal rights. For planning scheme amendments, the strategic planner explains the decisions being made by the Planning Authority and the Tasmanian Planning Commission. So our legal requirements. When deciding an application, the authority is required by law to seek further the sustainable development objectives of the Act, to consider representations received during the public notification period, and make the decision by reference to the planning scheme provisions. The rules are simple. Please comply with any directions given by myself, and please respect other people's views and their right to have a say. So we'll move on to item 2, which is apologies, and there's one apologies, which is Mayor Hickey for tonight's meeting. Item 3, pecuniary interest. Does any member have a pecuniary interest on any of the items? Josh, Alderman Coxo, sorry. Yeah. What item is that on?
It should be item number 1.
Item 5, the agenda? Yep. That's okay. No, item 5. Just note that for the records. Item 4, for confirmation of the minutes, can I have someone to move the minutes? It's moved by Alderman Cockshut, seconded by Alderman King. Any discussion?
No discussion, thanks.
No problems at all. Anyone else? We'll put that to the vote. Put the item to the vote. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. So we'll move on to the items for consideration. The first one is the redevelopment of the Hobart Showgrounds, and I'll hand over to the planning officers to present. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we're looking at today with the redevelopment of the showgrounds is a fairly similar proposal to one that was before the council a few years ago. However, there have been some changes that make it beyond the scope of what could be considered a minor amendment. So basically what we're looking at is full redevelopment of the showground site. All buildings that were to be demolished have already been demolished, so we're working with effectively a clean slate. We start to the northeast with a 92 caravan motorhome park, which will be adjacent to the Brooker Highway. That has a couple of small buildings for camp kitchens, toilets, amenities, those sort of things. Moving down to the southwest of that, the next significant improvement to the site is the, I'll move on to the next slide, is the oval. That will have, again, some facilities for people utilising the oval, so change rooms and those things, to the northwest of the oval, then the oval proper, and then we move down again to the southwest further, and that's where the main pavilion buildings are proposed. So that's 3 buildings that interconnect to form the plaza. So the first building, which is the northeastern building, is the pavilion building that has the theatre in it. It acts as a multi-purpose space. It's got function centre, it's got exhibition space, it can be a conference centre. To the northwest of that building we find a wing which is a hostel, so that's more accommodation there as needed. The shoulder building, which forms the bottom side of that plaza, is primarily an exhibition space, but it also has 2 elements of storage in there, so 2 large storage, which would be for things like your salvo storage and large items that are stored on site for a while. Then we have the gatehouse building, which houses upstairs is offices primarily dedicated to the administration of RAST, so the show organisers. The downstairs is another exhibition space. The plaza will be available for sort of public facilities, public events, markets, that sort of thing. Now, below the caravan park, we also have another building which is for dog training and also for maintenance of the overall site. The uses of the site are largely unchanged from what they currently are. So we've got the show, we've got occasional big events, we've got community meetings, we've got markets, we've got community organisations and all of those sort of things able to gather there. We will have larger events like some concerts and various other major events as they're booked, I guess, so we don't know exactly what they are, but that's quite exciting because it leaves it open and available for a variety of uses for the community. At this point, it's worth noting that on the other side of the highway, there is a state-owned car parking area on the corner of Goodwood Road. That is part of our application site because it's currently used by the site when there are major events and larger happenings like the show on the site, which require additional car parking to make sure that it's not flowing excessively into the community and clogging up the smaller suburban streets in the nearby area. So I guess the key differences between this application and the one that some of you will have seen a few years ago are materials and finishes on the buildings, slight changes to the way that the uses are operated in terms of hours of operation and how the facility will function as a whole. But probably the main difference is that there is a spine road running through the site. Now that spine road is currently proposed as an internal road for users of the site. However, as again was reported in the media recently, there is interest in amending the showgrounds special area provisions so that housing can occur around the, and I'll get this wrong, so I'm going to check my map, around the western side of the site. So currently it's in development, so there's nothing firm, but if the planning scheme provisions change to enable housing around that western portion of the site, it will also result in a desire to subdivide that land off so that people can own their homes. And if that does occur, that road will need to be taken over by council. So we've got a slight complication with this application in that whilst it is an internal road, there are one set of standards and rules that apply under the planning scheme, which are for construction of an internal road or basically a driveway, but a big one. So what has had to happen through negotiations and changes, which is part of the reason for this new application, is that the road width and form has to have generally been designed to a standard that will allow it to be big enough to be taken over by council as a public road. Unfortunately, we don't have capacity to put the conditions into this permit that would require the construction, the inspections, the ongoing maintenance post completion that is necessary for council to take it over as a public road. However, there's been extensive negotiation with the applicants, and we have got some advice in our permit, and we have a pathway forward to facilitate the road to be taken over through a separate deed of agreement. So that will happen outside the planning process, but that deed of agreement will essentially be between Rast and council, such that they will construct the road and have the inspections that council can be involved along the way to ensure that the road is constructed at a standard that we can take over without, at worst case, it needing to be ripped up and rebuilt. So we've got that sitting to the side of the planning process, but the changes to the road form itself were one of the things that facilitated the need for this new application. I think that's probably actually everything that I needed to say. I've got some slides there which tell us what our discretions are and what the official proposed uses are. I'd rather actually open you up to questions because I understand we're on quite a tight time frame. So is there anything anyone would like to know?
Thank you. Any questions from our authority members? Alderman King.
Thank you, Acting Chair. And let's not worry about the time frame. We'll get this done either now or afterwards. So we'll do it properly. And you mentioned a couple of things, like you said, it'd be a clean slate. Now, obviously, there's got to be the removal of potentially contaminated earthware, I guess. So is it a clean slate, or is it just mean there's nothing on there at the moment?
Sorry, when I say clean slate, I mean there are no buildings that need to be demolished, because in the reporting that had happened recently, they also mentioned that there was demolition occurring. So there's no demolition of any further buildings. So
right. But
the site as it is to be developed.
There'd have to be a lot of work done with the land itself. I mean, it's had lots of various products on it over the years. I know that's not probably a planning issue, but
I could potentially defer to our environmental health officers to see what level of contamination does need.
It's all been cleared for contamination.
we'll hear from the environmental people if they're there.
Sorry, Nathan.
Can you come back to me just a moment?
Oh, yeah. Is that all right if we pause
Yeah,
for
yeah,
my
sure.
finds part of
Sure.
the
And you said something about storage, and I missed what you said.
Oh, okay. So in the shoulder building, there are two large warehouse type spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And examples of the type of storage where salvos often store things there when they've got a big charity drive on. Rast may be storing things temporarily for when there's a show coming up, or it's just open and available as a storage facility or warehouse facility as and when needed. It may be commercially leased out. That's not defined yet, but the sort of uses were more of your...
Right, so it's not for a specific business or
No.
use at this point in time, it's just
No, not
a
at this
storage
point.
area there
Yeah,
available for hire.
potentially for hire, yes.
Yeah. Now, the car park that's state government owned, are we relying on that? Because if they decide they want to get rid of that at some stage, where does that leave us?
The application itself actually has sufficient car parking within the site for the planning scheme requirements.
Okay, I just thought you said that was important to the...
It is important to Rast because historically there has always been a reliance on that land. So it was important that that land, if it does get called in for a major event, so if there's a major event that has, for example, there's 61 spaces that may be taken up at various times for uploading and unloading, which will reduce the capacity of car parking within the site. So if there is a reason that there are multiple uses occurring on site and that car parking is taken out, there may be a need for the overflow to go over to the car parking over the highway. And when that occurs, you basically want to make sure it's managed safely and efficiently so that it doesn't cause flow-on problems in the surrounding area. So it is important in the one context of, for example, the show isn't part of this application, the show relies on that land, but it's not a mandatory requirement of the planning scheme. So technically, if the state takes it away, that won't make this whole use fall over.
I misunderstood what you meant there, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. And the last question at this stage, the Spine Road, the design, etc. Now, would that, if ever that went ahead and the road was built to a standard, is that going to come back to planning and also to come back to a full council meeting, I take it, as to whether we took it over or not?
I actually don't know the answer to how that's taken over. If any changes occur, if we do consider subdivision, that certainly comes back to planning for consideration. And typically with a subdivision application, we would make a recommendation of whether or not we take the road over. If our recommendation was that it hadn't been built to a standard and we either needed it rebuilt or needed to refuse the subdivision, I anticipate that would come back to council for a determination.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the process of deciding whether to take over a road is and how that occurs. I can ask Emily if you don't mind.
And is our environmental manager
Sorry.
right?
Yeah, so maybe just go to Emily if you're happy to expand on that.
Yes, so through the chair, we will enter into an agreement hopefully with the showgrounds to make sure the road is built to our satisfaction. And we're at the moment just getting some legal advice on how that agreement should work and potentially if it needs to come to a full council meeting for sign off as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, what was your name? Sorry. Nathan.
Apologies. Yes, so previous testing has determined that it does have some spots of low-level contamination, but none of those are human health risk. There's conditions in the permit that all soil material that's excavated does need to meet the EPA's Bulletin 105, so that's testing and retaining on site and proper disposal if it is found to be contaminated.
Fair enough. It's just when you said it was a clear site, I just wasn't sure what you meant. It's cleared and ready to go, or
Yes,
it's clear
apologies.
buildings with the stipulation that we need to make sure it's contamination's removed as required. Right, thank you.
Yeah, for you, me. I'd just like to question on the caravan park side to start with, is there going to be a toilet box and are they going to be disability accessible? And is the rest of the site going to be disability accessible?
Okay, so there's definitely toilet blocks within the caravan park. The design detail for a planning permit application doesn't actually bring in disability access or requirements, so that will be something that will come in later at the building permit stage. Equally, the whole of the site, I anticipate that there are things within the Building Code of Australia that require disability access and require equal access to everything. So I can definitely assure you that there are elevators between levels of the buildings and ways for people to gain access. I can't guarantee that on the current plans it's shown as disability friendly or equal access, but they won't pass building if it's not.
Makes sense. Yeah. Any further questions, Alderman Sewell? You're okay? No. No, with us. I just had a couple of questions, just more clarification around. So we talked about in the report about the annual show and the motorhome being used at the same time. That could obviously cause some issues, obviously with being sort of a busy time and obviously having public access, and that was obviously acknowledged. How is that then monitored?
So the showground operators have undertaken that they will be effectively blocking out their booking system so that whenever there is a major event planned for the site or whenever the Hobart show is on, they will have those dates blocked out so that both the motorhome park and the hostel will be unable to be occupied by anybody other than, and we've actually got conditions within our engineering conditions that say that while those things are occurring, the motorhome can only be used. So it's not saying that you can't book those facilities at all. What it's saying is so the motorhome park would be used presumably during the show for people who are working at the show. And similarly, when there's a major event, like if there's a concert, you can either buy your concert ticket or you can buy your concert and camping for the night type ticket. So it's blocking it out for the exclusive use of the event that tips it over the parking threshold that would otherwise cause problems to the surrounding area.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And the Spine Road question's kind of been asked with that. I guess my only concern around that is obviously, but I have, obviously it's at a good faith stage, you've got to take it a little bit on trust, but I'm assured by that, so I'm confident around that will happen and take place. Just a question on the tower, what do you call it? What's the technical name for it?
The,
Observation tower or the,
transmission tower, no,
no, the call, is
yeah.
it the callers up there, or is that, it seems quite high?
It is.
Yeah,
That I'm told that is the standard for that type of tower for this type of site. So
Okay.
whenever you have a showground, you want the people who are commentating from
yeah,
the
commentators,
commentary
that's it,
tower,
yep.
to be able to have a good overview of the whole site. And this is what I'm told is the standard for that sort of thing.
And that fits in within,
It is higher than the standards permissible within the showgrounds special area plan. However, in the context of the development proposed, the siting within the site, it's not going to cause a privacy issue for any of the nearby houses because it's facing the wrong way and it's far enough away. It's not going to cause an unreasonable overshadowing the bulk of it when it's seen behind the rest of the buildings. And when you start to layer the appearance of the site, it's not unreasonable for that area, for that use, given its historical presence in some form or another as well.
yeah, no, that's fine. And again, more for clarification, if the proposed uses change, so for instance, if the motorhome park, and there was a use change, that obviously there's another permit that has to, I think we've obviously brought that up. I just want to make that, clarify
Yes, so if any of the uses as described in this permit are found to no longer be viable and don't fit the business model, then the site owners will have to come back to us and seek approval for a different use.
Yep, okay, that's great. And my only other one, because I just like asking questions, the centre, so is that, the theatre, is that sort of on a casual basis, or is it a permanent type arrangement, or how is that?
To be honest with you,
It doesn't really fall into the application side of things, really.
it's got so many varied uses. So it can be for presentations, it can be for conferences, it can be for plays, it can be for such a diversity of uses. It'll come down to the business model for the site owners of how they wish to use it at the time.
Okay, that's fine. That's all from me. Thank you. Just to clarify, no other questions from anyone? Everyone's happy? All right. So we'll I'll just call for members. Sorry, the applicant, Poppy Sharkey, is online and wanted to present to the authority. Are you online, Poppy?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, got you loud and clear.
Wonderful. So I am a consulting town planner from Irene Inc. Planning and Urban Design, and the agent for the Royal Agricultural Show Society. So I didn't necessarily have anything to present as such, but was available for questions from the Alderman and from you, Chair, as needed.
No worries. All right, thank you. All right, so at the point where I'll ask for a mover of the recommendation, and the recommendation's very lengthy, so I won't actually read that out entirely. But we'll move the recommendation. Can I get a mover for that? Alderman King, mover, seconder, Alderman Marks, and we can discuss.
Thank you, Chair. Look, this has been a long time coming on. Mr. Gadd's down there. That's been going back and forth, and here we are. It'll bring a lot of business to Glenorchy, which we're excited about. At the same time, this is a planning decision, not a business decision from our perspective. I see there are a number of conditions which I'm sure our staff will monitor closely, and there's reasons for those. Nothing's black and white when it comes to planning. So I think with all the conditions that are there and the presentation that we've received and all the information we've received, we can move forward with this recommendation as it stands.
No worries, thank you. Alderman, nice to say anything? Alderman Stringer? Discussion? No worries at all. I've just got a couple of comments I'd like to make. Obviously, yeah, so like Alderman King has mentioned, that there is a number of discretions, and a lot of that has been worked in the conditions that have been applied, and it's there to satisfy and to make sure that things are done well. You know, the vision of the Royal Agricultural Society of Tasmania has been years in the making. It's been carefully examined by our planning team, and I just want to congratulate Helen and the planning team in that, and it's a very extensive report, and the explanation around the discretions are really thorough. So thank you very much for that. I also commend the applicant as well, and their team in working with council to achieve the best outcome for all the parties and especially our community. Whilst it may sometimes appear that it's slow, I can guarantee the applicant and our community that our planning team takes their role very seriously. It sets to apply the standards that have been set and made to abide by. So when our team is asking for more information, it's not necessarily for the reasons to be difficult. It's the reasons to be able to try and move forward, to pivot, to find a solution, and so that they all fits into the guidelines. And it's vital that we work within these structures and that there are rules that we need to follow. So there's certainly no should be right attitude in our planning team. It's done with excellence and meticulous thought. So well done to everyone involved, and I'm really pleased to see this. It's a real modernisation of the infrastructure, the building facilities, the showgrounds allows the past and the present, and new facilities and activities to happen. You know, it looks as though it's going to be, you know, a first-class facility, and it's really exciting for our community. So I look forward to seeing the progress, and I'm satisfied and I agree with the planning team. There was no representations made, and I'll be voting for the recommendation. So with that all done, I'll put the motion as the recommendation. Oh, sorry, I'll come back to you if you like. I'll go back and close if you like.
I look around the room and think pretty confident I'm the oldest here, and the show was a big part of my life growing up, and the showgrounds have changed over my life, and here we are. Progress is a good thing, it can be a bad thing, but in this case I think it's a good thing. I think we're moving forward. I think Deputy Mayor mentioned, Acting Mayor mentioned past and present. Well, here we are. You know, I've been part of the past, and now I look forward to being part of the present and seeing us evolve in Glenorchy and move forward. And yes, I'll be voting for it as well.
Perfect. Well, we'll put the motion. All those in favour, raise your hand. That's passed unanimously. And I'll hand back over to the planners to explain further.
Sorry, first GPA meeting. Okay, so a permit will issue following this meeting, and then the applicant has 14 days in which they can appeal any of our conditions. There were no representatives, so there'll be no, I would not envisage any third-party appeals to the process. And that's about it. Thank you.
Right, thank you, and well done.
Thank you.
Perfect. We'll move on to item 6.
I'll just go and get all the copies.
Alderman Cockshott, yes, please do that.
Oh, he was listening. That's a cute. Timing's everything.
Alderman Cockshott's re-entered the meeting. So moving on to item 6, is the planning scheme amendment request to allow tourist operation at 100 Cadbury Road in Claremont. And I'll invite the team to present on that one. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I will take you through the planning scheme amendment PLA M2401 to allow a tourist operation. So the site is at the Cadbury Chocolate Factory site at 100 Cadbury Road, Claremont. An image of the site is on the screen. The zoning map is also on the screen. It is a mixed-use mixed-zoned site with light industrial, predominantly general industrial, open space and environment management zone. A bit of background about what the proponent anticipates to do on this site through this planning scheme amendment is to allow the Cadbury visitor experience. So the first image on the screen is the image that was provided to us from the applicant, which indicates where this future use and development is going to potentially occur. The rest of the images are images that we got through public media and internet. The proposal was also described by the applicant, and it is described to have a chocolate experience with a time tunnel, chocolate lounge, chocolate central, parkland, playground, etc., which are all at the moment at early conceptual stages. So to enable the Cadbury visitor experience, a planning scheme amendment is required because these uses are otherwise not allowed in the general industrial and light industrial zones. So the applicant has proposed a site-specific qualification in the Glenorchy LPS to allow for the additional uses being a tourist operation use, community meeting and entertainment, and generally retail and hire, with the qualification where part of a Cadbury visitor experience. Now, council officers support the overall intent of the proposal. However, there are some concerns raised because we think the proposed planning scheme amendment does not adequately address some of the issues. So the planning scheme is not designed to cater for these proposed uses that are otherwise not allowed in these zones, and therefore does not have enough provisions in the state planning provisions to enable consideration of the surrounding residential amenity and the site's unique heritage qualities that may be impacted due to the potential scale of the use and development of the proposal. Therefore, we think the amendment does not, in its current form, does not meet the legislative requirements under LUPA, and especially furthering the Schedule 1 objectives of fair, orderly and sustainable use and development of the site, promoting health and well-being of all residents and all Tasmanians, and protecting heritage qualities. So the concerns obviously are described in detail in the planning report that you would have read, but I will go through some of these concerns at a high level in this presentation. So the uses proposed, the proponent has proposed 3 uses. So tourist operation use, which they say is the main use, and the community meeting and entertainment, and the general retail and hire uses that are also associated with the visitor experience associated with the chocolate factory. However, we think under the Tasmanian planning scheme, under clause 6.2.2, it clearly says that a use and development that is directly associated with and a subservient part of another use must be categorized under the same use. So we think the tourist operation use, the umbrella primary use, would allow for the consideration of the additional 2 uses, which was also described that way in the applicant's proposed planning scheme amendment request. We also think that there are not adequate use standards for this specific use, that is the tourist operation use, because it is not anticipated in the light industrial or general industrial zones. Normally under the industrial zones, use impacts on residential amenity is governed by the EPA or the attenuation code. And a tourist operation use in all the other zones has considerations of hours of operation, external lighting, and commercial vehicular movement, and how this may impact nearby residential properties. And normally, in a general sense, industrial zones are not usually immediately adjoining residential land. However, this site is unique due to its history and its location and the prominence of the site, that this general industrial zone site is immediately adjoining residences. So we think there should be additional use standards to consider, similar to how this use is subject to use standards in other zones, to consider the protection of adjoining residential amenities. So we think it needs 3 additional use standards, and these use standards are the same that are in the other zone provisions as well. We also think that the Cadbury Chocolate Factory is a primary employment, an important source of employment for us in our municipality. So we think there should be an additional control to ensure that this new tourist operation use does not negatively impact on the operation of the existing industrial use. So we think there should be an additional standard to ensure that we can consider any potential negative impacts. There's some heritage concerns as well, which I'll pass on to David to describe.
Thanks, Darshini. So the heritage significance in regards to the factory is obviously the factory complex itself, which doesn't form part of the application. but is of significance, but also due to its the garden city setting principles that have been applied in its setting. The proposed development coincides with the approaches to the factory, which is integral to its significance. So if we just flick to the next slide, please, Darshini, we'll see that the area made available to the applicant by Mondelez coincides with a number of features, which you can see. So the blue area on the presentation in the slide coincides with the open space approaches to the factory. That includes an avenue of trees, which was the main historical approaches to the Check Lodge, with clear views of the clock tower. The former Cadbury branch line, railway line, snakes its way along on the periphery of the river there as well. The Check Lodge and the clock tower are part of the key reference points there as well. So when we look at the development and in light of what's described, the use is one thing. So clearly tours have been a really much loved and an important part of the factory were between, say, the 1950s, I think, and 2008, but they were in-factory tours. Now, what's proposed here is something quite different in scale from that, and is not in-factory. They are proposed for, in essence, in the open space approaches to the factory. So it's a fragile balance there, because one of the reasons that this factory coexists and was designed to coexist with its industrial, with its residential estate, and the whole complex extends back as far as down Cadbury Road to where the primary school is, all the way up to the factory and included the golf course. Is that this open space provides that buffer zone between the two entities, and so there aren't too many places where where industry happily coexists with a suburb so close by, and so when we look at the area that's proposed for development, and then the list of potential offerings, that's arboretum, time tunnel, the elements that Darshini explained in the report, we can see there's going to be, and playground, we can see there's going to be quite a deal of infrastructure there. We can also then see that coincides with these elements in an area that was intended deliberately to be open space, and therefore, and the applicant has contended that the Heritage Code is an adequate tool for that assessment. We've determined that the Heritage Code requires, or that we need to build into the specific area plan an additional single new standard under siting and location to enable this setting of the factory to be considered, and to name up the things that we considered to be important for the applicant to respond to in regards to proposing a development there. And we're doing that. We do these things for all, not just one entity. But in doing so, I think it will also assist. I'd argue it will also assist the applicant in understanding. It will achieve certainty by assisting the applicant to understand the aspects that we consider to be important in any assessment. Whereas the Heritage Code, for siting and location, that is the way it's currently framed, has a standard for performance criterion relating to development in the setbacks, and the front setback could potentially be a problem when it comes to development time. But by naming up these other elements, these elements we consider to be important, that will give clear parameters that the applicant will absolutely have to respond to, because it's a performance-based planning scheme, but we'll give them a clear pathway for submitting an application when it comes to the time of the development. So we've proposed these extra standards, just replacing one standard of the Heritage Code, which contains, as you're aware, numerous standards. We only want to replace the standard for siting and location, with a more specific standard that names up the elements that we consider to be significant, and and defines the standards that we want to see the applicant hit in order to demonstrate that it satisfies the planning scheme.
So, thanks, David. So as David described, we think that there should be additional standards. We're not against the proposal, we are excited for it. However, having extra controls will enable or set clear guidelines and parameters to make sure that we are also considering our community, the amenity of our residences around the site, and the site's unique heritage qualities. Now, to introduce new standards in an LPS, there are various planning tools, being the site-specific qualification and a specific area plan. Site-specific qualifications are normally for simple additional controls in an LPS, such as allowing a new use that's not allowed or introducing a new standard, etc. However, a specific area plan allows for a comprehensive planning tool in the LPS where all of these standards are together, they read well, they set clear guidelines and easier for the community and planning professionals to use and apply these controls. So therefore, council officers are recommending a modified planning scheme amendment that would still enable the applicant and the proponent to achieve the future intended outcomes for the site with a clear set of guidelines and rules. Without these recommended controls, there is significant risk of adverse impacts, including loss of residential amenity for nearby residents, diminished heritage values, and challenges in approving future development within the heritage significant landscape gardens. So the modified planning scheme amendment meets the LUPA legislative requirements and especially meets Section 32(4) test, which is a test that is required to be met when a new control is being added in an LPS. So it meets Section 32(4)A because it is a significant tourist operation, potentially bringing in quite a lot of economy to the state and the region. And it also meets Section 32(4)B because the site is unique, being in a general industrial zone that immediately adjoins a residential area and in a prominent position on the Cadbury Peninsula with significant local historic heritage values, which requires additional controls to allow this use that is otherwise not allowed in the zone. So the final conclusion is the officers recommend a modification to the planning scheme amendment to delete the additional uses of general retail and hire and community meeting and entertainment, conversion of the site-specific qualification into a specific area plan as provided with the documentation, and inclusion of additional use standards relating to residential amenity and protection of the industrial use on the site, and inclusion of a development standard to enable appropriate assessment of the heritage and setting of buildings, structures, and landscape elements. Questions?
Perfect. Thank you, Dashini. Yeah, any questions? Oh, straight up.
So, Dashini and David, is this likely to potentially stop this going ahead?
The planning scheme amendment, the recommended amendment?
I mean, from a business point of view, is this potentially likely to stop?
No, so we don't think that the additional controls that we have recommended are onerous in any sort. So things like hours of operation and commercial vehicular movements are just setting some time frames that they can operate. There's always performance criteria as well. All of the other zones have similar controls. This will just enable council, when we do get a planning application in the future, to put in conditions saying, the hours of operation must be such and such or whatever. And in terms of the heritage controls, I'll probably let David take that.
Yeah, look, the way I see it operating is we've introduced certainty into a process that with the existing standard is uncertain for the applicant, in my view. When I look at the standards, I'll leave it to the applicant to articulate their response to that, as they have done in their representation. But I think by naming up the qualities that we see as important, we've set a standard that we want to see maintained. If you look at all those elements that are proposed, you know, I guess the assumption then is that they will need to be configured in a way that will not intrude on those key elements to the extent that's unacceptable. And you know, I'd also like to make a point, if I could, that there's already a standard for prohibited use of a heritage place in the scheme, 7.4, that contains a range of criteria that need to be met. One of them of which is a conservation plan for the site. We've built that into so we haven't raised the bar insofar as that's concerned. We've got a parallel standard, but we've been even more pragmatic about it in response to some questions from the applicant by making that a targeted conservation management plan written with specific regard to the use of the site and related, focused on that open space approaches with reference to the factory, not requiring a full conservation plan of the factory as well. So, you know, I think from my point of view, it's a pragmatic response. It's a clear response. It should introduce clarity into the process. And, you know, to be honest, I'd have concerns if the applicant is not prepared to respond to those types of things that we've raised, because they are, you know, part of the nub of the heritage listing of the place that we would normally expect anyway.
I just want to understand the deletion of use of classes, general retail and hire, and community meeting and entertainment. So we're saying that they can't do any of that.
No, so that, I'll take that one. So what was proposed is community meeting and entertainment and generally retail and hire were part of the Cadbury visitor experience. So all of those uses will be under the main tourist operation use. For example, if you take Mona, there's all these things like happening, like obviously there's cafes, there's events, all of that fall under that use class, the main use. And same with the last proposal that we just saw, that you don't necessarily need all these extra uses with a qualification where part of the Cadbury visitor experience, because they're all ancillary to the main use. So they, the proponent would still be able to have, say, some sort of functions or chocolate related sort of things in the Cadbury visitor experience. They may have retail, they definitely will be able to have souvenir shops, so all of those sort of uses. It just depends. As long as it is subservient and under that main tourist operation use, there is no need to specifically have those as separate uses with the extra qualification saying we're part of a visitor experience.
You could look at that the other way and say, well, if you can do that, why are we deleting these uses? I mean, you talk about the housing and the factory came before the housing. I mean, let's face it, the factory was there and then the houses were built afterwards for the workers. I grew up out there. I'm not quite sure I'm happy about that, but anyway, I'll leave that to other people to ask questions from that.
It's kind of a question, it's more my own peace of mind. So with these changes implementing, it's part of ensuring the integrity of the heritage of the site, maintaining the current use of the factory, so there can't be no changes to hours of operation and everything like that, so it continues as is, but having clear guidelines for the project overall, so there's a yardstick given this sort of project doesn't fall into current scope of the planning scheme. Is that what we're trying to say?
Yes, so all of these recommendations will purely only apply to the tourist operation use. So the existing chocolate factory, none of the new controls will not impact the operation of the existing uses on the site. It will only purely apply to the tourist operation use.
Yeah, and Alderman King, when you raised about point A, so the community meeting entertainment purposes, if there was to be like a function, like you said, the chocolate experience brings you Elton John, just making up something, right?
Yeah.
Are we saying that can't happen? Or?
It would happen if it's under the subservient use.
Right.
So obviously the applicant has the option. So this is the starting stage of the planning scheme amendment process, which I'll go through what the next steps are. But if prepared, the applicant will have an opportunity to submit a representation, and we'd be able to review based on what sort of matters were raised on the representation, and then it will be submitted to the Tasmanian Planning Commission, where we can test it out through the panel hearing process as well. But we think having where part of a Cadbury visitor experience makes it more ambiguous and more uncertain, because where part of, could it be outside, could it be inside, it becomes a bit more, I think it makes it a bit more confusing rather than leaving the planning system to work the way it is meant to work, that is subservient uses. There's a clear pathway through clause 6.2.2 for all uses in the planning scheme. This is the normal practice. So these additional uses where they're saying community meeting and entertainment and general retail and hire, where part of a Cadbury visitor experience with that qualification fit under the main tourist operation use anyway.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Gentlemen, any other questions? No? I haven't been advised that they are. Yes, so, yes, the proponent's not here, are they? Oh, you are? Would you like to speak at all?
We don't need to speak to it other than to say we're just keen to progress through the process.
Perfect, no worries.
You're happy with this?
We continue to have some reservations. However, there is, as Dashini has alluded to, there is a process that we can go through. We've got a representation into it, and we think that that's the most sensible approach at this stage.
Okay. So given that we approve this, then it gives you an opportunity to then take it
That's
further.
correct.
Thank you. So I've just got a couple of questions as well. Regarding the timeline for the SSQ, what sort of timeline are we thinking? What's an average timeline for that to happen?
Whether it's an SSQ or a SAP, it's the same process, and it needs to meet the same legislative requirement, which is section 32 for A or B, along with the LPS criteria set under LUPA. And it is hard to say exactly what the timing would be. Obviously, once the GPA makes their decision on the planning scheme amendment today, we'd be preparing, if prepared, we'd be preparing it for public advertising, which is 28 days. And then we'll bring it back to the GPA if we have any representations received. Now, the representations can be from the community and the applicant. Once we prepare this planning scheme amendment, it becomes council's planning scheme amendment. And we'll have to defend it at the planning commission as well. Obviously, the applicant will have an opportunity to have their say and be part of that process. After the GPA considers any representations and any modifications, if required, at a future GPA, which will potentially be March or April GPA, it will be submitted to the Tasmanian Planning Commission. And once it's with the commission, it's a bit hard for us to say exactly how long, but normally it's about 8 to 12 months for them to do their assessment, undertake panel hearings, and then make their decision. And their decision can be either to approve what we've submitted, approve it with modifications, or even reject the amendment. So once we submit it, it's purely
Out of
our hands, yeah.
Just a question around the addition of new use. It talks about general retail.
Yeah.
So could a building be leased and then leased out to Coles or Woolworths and then be put on that site if that goes in?
No, well, even if we have,
Like-
even if we go with how the applicant wants it, which is actually listing it out in the SAP saying general retail and hire, where part of the Cadbury visitor experience, I don't think it would, but that's what makes it unclear, where part of. Does that mean if the Coles and Woolies is underneath the Cadbury visitor experience, it's part of it, so it's allowed? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But if we go with the subservient uses approach, which is the normal approach in the Tasmanian planning system, then clearly it won't allow it. It will only allow, say, a shop with selling chocolates or maybe souvenirs, maybe even T-shirts with Cadbury stuff on it.
Merchandise.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. So if we followed through with the SSQ approach, there's more, what's the word, there's more, things could possibly go wrong in terms of what is out there for that site. Is that effectively?
Yes.
It's too.
I think the SSQ leaves it too open, so obviously, even if the applicant and the proponent have good intentions for the site, which we are not doubting, it just enables us to have some clear guidelines. So if we go with the SSQ approach, they could potentially be operating till 2 a.m. in the night, and there's no way we can put a condition on there. It would be harder. We would try to put conditions, but it would be harder. They could have concerts there with noise implications. They could have those sort of. I think it just leaves it a bit open. And with heritage, it's very important because this site is clearly described as an industry in a garden by the mountain and sea. That's how the statement of significance is described. And it would make it harder for us to actually approve. And I think if we had the master plan, or if it was a combined planning scheme amendment and planning application where we knew what we were approving, it would have made it a bit easier. But given that we actually don't have much information and we just have a few images online and just a map which very broadly shows where this could be, we have no idea how big it would be. It could be very small and may not have any impacts, but it could be very large, because once you allow this use on the site, they can basically occupy the whole site, technically. So, and then it makes it harder for us to potentially approve this in the future because of heritage, because of how the statement of significance is currently listed in the planning scheme, and potentially have impacts and make it harder for us to sort of regulate what's happening there. So I think by putting these controls, I don't think it's going to increase any complexity for the project. It would just set clear guidelines. As I mentioned, I think even in the heritage sort of that image that we have, we're not saying that, we're saying you've got to protect that tree line corridor, the clock tower, and those sort of things, but we're saying you need to maintain that sort of the rail line formation, but not necessarily don't build on it, or you can't, we're not putting any strict restrictions. I think it would be through good design and through good sort of, I guess, consideration of these values of what's important on the site, the applicant will still be able to achieve what they want, and it will just enable us to have the right consideration and enable orderly and fair planning.
So effectively, the SAP is a more thorough, clearer approach.
Yeah, and if anything, it sets the clear intention that a tourist operation is allowed on the site.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's all my questions. So we will move on to moving the recommendation. Just clarify, there's no other further questions from anyone? No. So we'll move the recommendation, which is outlined in the agenda. So can I have a mover for that? Alderman Marks, and seconded Alderman Cockshott. Will you speak to it, please, gentlemen? Open it for debate. You happy? Yep.
I think it's been
Cockshott.
thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's been a very presentation, I should say. It's good to see that we're taking measures in place to kind of be pragmatic in regards to heritage, the current site and the future. I think it's a pretty exciting project for the municipality, and keen to see council and the proponent work together to achieve the best outcome. But I think we've done our due diligence, and I'm keen to see the process continue. I think we've outlined, obviously this is the first stage, so I think it'll be good if we can sign off the hurdle tonight, and I look forward to seeing this progress over the coming months.
Thank you. Alderman King.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to the proponents to hear briefly from them. I look forward to this progressing. However it's done, I look forward to progressing. So I appreciate that if we move on this tonight, then one way or the other it can progress, and I want it to progress. I love chocolate. Is that a conflict of interest? Is it?
Potentially.
Growing up in Cadbury's.
Potentially.
Well, means we're all have to leave.
Yeah, true. I'd like to make a comment is, the Cadbury visitor experience that we've seen and the concepts are, it's an amazing concept. It would add to our city. and it will bring so much economy and life and visitors to our great city. But from a planning point of view, it must be done really well. It must be done with consideration, and in my thinking is it needs to be done with a best practice approach. And just in the conversations, in the reading and listening to our planning team, I just feel like the SSQ is not the right tool to be managing this moving forward. The SAP does seem to be, a more of a holistic approach. It's a unique site out there. It's a rare kind of industry, residential kind of zone play. There's sports grounds up there. Has been a tourist attraction, potentially could be a new one. So it's a unique area, and a specific area plan I feel will address the controls that we're wanting to have in there. Then SAPs are common. We've got one at Mona, Dashini mentioned. Wilkinson Point has a SAP. The Northern Apartments Corridor has a SAP. The Glenorchy Principal Activity Centre has a SAP. So these are not unusual. It's not unusual to have these mechanisms in our planning. So I see that it will protect our community. It will protect the applicant and give clear guidelines. And I just don't want to see any accidental missteps and unintended consequences. I feel like everyone's on the same page wanting to move forward, but I just want to protect the future decisions. And if we don't have these good checks and balances and controls in place, we want to protect the interests of the city moving forward and that site as a whole. So I feel like that the SAP does provide that assurance to our residents and our history and the future. Otherwise, it could add ambiguity and a little bit confusion. So the ultimate goal and the outcome can be achieved using the recommendations. So I'll be supporting the recommendation as it reads there. So I'll close the debate. Back to the mover, Alderman Tim, because Alderman Mark, sorry.
No.
Good, perfect. All right, we'll put the motion as it is. All in favour, raise your hand. Thank you. It's passed unanimously. I'll hand back to the planners to advise the next steps.
So I went through this already. So it's prepared. It's prepared now. Public exhibition for 28 days through Feb and March. We'll bring back the planning scheme amendment if we receive any representations and if we think there's any modifications that are required at a future GPA. Then we will submit this planning scheme amendment to the Planning Commission. Then the Commission undertakes their assessment, considers representations and holds hearings, and the Commission then determines whether to approve the amendment with modifications or reject the amendment.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to a close. So thank you to everyone who's attended here in Chambers and those online as well. And thank you to our staff and the planning team for the reports. We'll bring that to a close. And thank you very much and have a good evening.